Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. Today, we're actually doing our third update about beavers. We keep learning more and more about beavers. Beavers, as you remember, are the largest rodent in North America, and they may weigh anywhere from 30 to 100 pounds, but most weigh a little bit less than 50 pounds. They're very territorial, and they're crepuscular, which means they're most active at dusk and dawn. The male and female beavers look alike. In fact, the only way to tell them apart is by the scent of their anal glands. Beavers are aquatic animals. They can swim at about 5 miles per hour. Their webbed hind feet are used for swimming, and they use their tail as a rudder. They can hold their breath for 15 to 20 minutes, but usually they only stay underwater for about 5 to 6 minutes at a time. And their nostrils and their ears have valves that close when they're underwater, and they have nictitating membranes that cover their eyes when they're underwater. Their heart rate decreases about 50% when diving. That's the well known dive reflex that many mammals share. Beavers are monogamous. They pair for life and they breed in the winter. And usually 3 to 5 kits are born in May or June. Here you see 3 kits with a mother beaver. And the young stay with the family for 1 to 2 years. Young beavers are usually sent off on their own at about 2 years. And beavers can live up to about 10 years old in the wild. The juvenile beavers usually stay with the family for 1 or 2 years, but then they're sent off on their own at about 2 years, often forcefully. And we've seen a video where a mother beaver is actually attacking a young teenage beaver who's reluctant to leave. Uh, the young beavers have been taught how to find food, how to build dams, and how to maintain a lodge, but some may not make it. They may fall prey to predators or car accidents. And solo beavers also sometimes don't survive the winter, and that's because they don't have others to huddle together with and conserve heat when they're in their lodge in winter. But many of them are successful. Uh, the three most salient characteristics of beavers are the fur, the tail, and the teeth. The beaver's coat was widely sought by trappers for many, many years. The coat typically has somewhere around 100,000 hairs per square inch. And this helps keep the beaver warm. It helps them float in the water. And it helps protect them against some predators. The guard hairs produce some of that protection and buoyancy and insulation. They're typically 2 to 2.5 inches long, and they protect the rest of the fur. The beavers also use a oily substance from their anal glands to help waterproof their coat. And the beaver's coat does molt every summer. The beaver's tail has multiple functions. The hairy tail is conical, very muscular, and the rest of the tail is very flat and scaly. The tail helps the beaver stay upright when he's chewing a tree. It acts like a rudder when he's swimming, and it stores fat for the winter. That's very important for getting them through the winter. And there's also a vascular supply in the tail that helps them regulate body heat, either in hot or cold temperatures. The beaver's tail has yet another function. They make a loud slap with their tail, and that slap might be a warning or simply communication. Uh, Beaver's teeth, again, they're famous for their iconic buck teeth. They have 4 incisors that are long, and they're separated from other parts of the dental arch. And interestingly, they're hardened with iron, and that may cause an orange discoloration. So here, particularly in this lower photo, you see a very orange discoloration to their teeth. They also have a second layer of lips behind the incisors, and these protect the beaver from swallowing lots of water or splinters when they're either underwater or gnawing on a tree. And they also have molars that they use for grinding up wood and other woody products. Gnawing with these teeth is important for more reasons than just eating and building. And that's because their teeth continue to grow. Actually, a characteristic of all rodents is that teeth never stop growing. So actually, the beavers have to chew wood in order to keep these teeth at a reasonable length. The beaver's paws, the front paws, actually kind of resemble human hands. There's 5 fingers, and they do have claws, and this helps them handle sticks. And again, here's a beaver holding onto a stick with those claws. The hind paws, on the other hand, are webbed. There's 5 feet. These webbed paws make them very good swimmers. But none of their paws work very well when they're on slippery surfaces like snow or ice. Also, the hind paw also has a special toe or a split nail that helps them to be able to comb oils through their hair for waterproofing. The beavers have 2 pairs of glands, special glands. They have castor sacs, which are part of the urethra, and anal glands. The castor sacs secrete castoreum, which is a liquid substance used mainly for marking their territory. And the anal glands produce an oily substance, as we mentioned, that the beavers use to help waterproof their coat. And the latter substance also plays a role in individual and family recognition. We'll talk more about castoreum later on. Beavers do have benefits of living in families. Most importantly, they huddle together in their lodge to help keep warm in winter. And beavers also help groom each other since they can't reach their own backs. And this is showing 2 beavers that are grooming each other. Was that what you saw, an otter or a beaver or a muskrat or a mink? All 4 of these semi-aquatic mammals superficially resemble each other when they're in the water. So how do you tell them apart? You have to look at the size, the tail, their face, whether they have whiskers, the swimming pattern, and what might be in their mouth. Here you see a otter, here's a muskrat, here's a mink, and here's a beaver. So again, the beaver obviously is the biggest of the bunch, typically weighing about 50 pounds. It has a few chin whiskers, but not too many. It has the characteristic large paddle-like tail, and when it swims, it produces a pulsing motion in the water, and you may hear that tail slap. When they swim, they tend to swim in a straight line with just their head above the water, so you'll see a trailing V shape in the water. They eat woody plants, twigs, trees, so you may see them swimming with a stick in their mouth. On the other hand, the otter is smaller, weighing 10 to 30 pounds, has very prominent chin whiskers, and you may see a fish in its mouth. Its tail is narrower and it's tapered, and they may twist and turn when swimming. They make a lot of dolphin-like moves and are very playful when they're swimming. The muskrat is much smaller, typically 1 to 4 pounds, has kind of a chubby appearance, and has a long, skinny rat-like tail. And it has a very characteristic flickering motion of the tail when it's in the water. And they eat mostly grasses, so you may see them swimming with some grass in their mouth. The mink, again, is about 3 pounds. The minks have a long, streamlined body with a smaller head than the muskrat, and their fur is darker. They have a long, furry tail. And when they're swimming, you often see the head, the body, and the tail on the surface. So we're going to look first at a beaver swimming. Remember, we said that beavers tend to swim in a straight line, leaving a trailing V, and their tail may produce a pulsing motion in the water. On the other hand, river otters are more likely to twist and turn. Their swim is more playful. There you see the beaver. There's the famous tail slap. But here you see the beaver, you see just the head, and he's swimming in a straight line. And another tail slap. Now, on the other hand, whereas the beavers swim straight, the otters are much more playful and twisting and turning. I'm sorry for these commercials. They keep inserting themselves. And so here's a river otter swimming, goes underwater, swimming around. His head's going to pop up, goes back down again. That was a dolphin-like move. Here he's staying underwater, probably chasing some prey underneath there. Again, back and forth, up and down. And now you're going to see him pop up over the sides, and he's actually got a fish in his mouth. Now here's the muskrat swimming. The muskrat tail moves side to side when swimming and produces this characteristic flickering motion. So here comes the muskrat. And look at that tail. Very characteristic flickering of the tail. That's pretty unmistakable. So if you see that, you won't have any difficulty identifying that as a muskrat. And last of all, the mink. Mink are excellent swimmers, and they're very quick and they're very agile. And here's a mink swimming on a beaver pond. There he is underwater, going to come over and climb up a tree. Mink are also very good climbers. Uh, so again, we see plenty of signs of beaver activity when we're out in the forest. We'll see gnawed tree spires, we'll see freshly chewed saplings, beaver dams, beaver lodges, beaver canals, scent mounds, and beaver slides, in addition to typical beaver tracks. And if you're lucky enough, you might even hear a tail slap while you're out there. So again, signs of beaver activity. These are from Heath Forest here at Eastman. The beavers are very active collecting wood from the edge of our wetland. The wetland is out here, and they've been very active at gnawing on these trees here. Note all these wood chips on the ground here. And they left quite an interesting sculpture here as well. Uh, the beavers like different tree sizes for different things. Here you see a fairly sizable tree trunk that they've got, but look at these things here. These three things that look like spikes. Uh, Beavers actually are particularly fond of stems and branches that are less than 3 inches in diameter. These were each probably about 6 to 8 inches above the ground and very sharp. These were actually adjacent to one of our trails in Heath Forest, and we actually had to cut them down even with the ground because we were concerned that somebody could fall on them and actually impale themselves. Beaver tracks are easier to see in mud or in snow. Their front paws, as we mentioned, resemble human hands with 5 fingers and claws. Sometimes only 4 of the fingers will show. And the hind tracks typically have 5 toes with evidence of webbing. So here is what they would look like. And claw marks are usually present on both the front and the hind paws. But often the tracks are obscured by their tail dragging or branches that they might be carrying. So again, this is showing how the tracks got obscured by probably their tail and or branches when they're out in the winter. Here's some beaver tracks in the mud. These were taken over at the Sawyer Brook headwaters, and you can see very nicely here you see 5 fingers. This is probably a rear foot, looks like it's webbed. And beaver scat, you're probably not going to see it. And that's because beavers defecate underwater. If you could see it, it usually consists of balls of sawdust. Beavers also make scent mounds. They mix castoreum, which was one of those secretions we talked about. They mix it with urine and excrete it into mounds of mud, leaves, and pond bottom debris. So this is showing several beaver mounds. And these castor mounds are used for attracting a mate or in telling other beavers, hey, this is my territory. This is already taken. And these mounds can be up to 3 feet high, but usually they're much smaller. And they're typically built in spring. You may see a beaver slide. Beaver slides are slick, muddy trails that a beaver makes along the banks of a beaver pond or a creek, and they drag or float big branches down these beaver slides. So this is showing one in the mud. There's water down here, and the beaver probably slides some big branches down this slide. So what do beavers eat? Well, again, they're obviously true vegetarians. They eat leaves, bark, twigs, sprouts, occasionally fruits and buds of shrubs or trees, and occasionally aquatic plants like pond grass, water lilies, cattails, sedges, and rushes. In the summer, they eat a lot of aquatic plants, grasses, ferns, And they'll eat the bark stripped from some of their building materials, and they may also eat berries if they're available. But in winter, they cache leaves and the inner bark of saplings and branches that they store at the underwater at the base of their lodge, and that's what they eat in winter. So a family of beaver needs to eat about a ton of branches to survive the winter. And the preferred woody plants are alder, aspen, birch, willow, ash, and maple. And but they only consume the bark. They do eat the cambium. They tend to avoid evergreens except for using them for building. That's probably because the sap is a little bit too sticky from the evergreens. And red maple they'll use primarily for building, but not eating. As I mentioned before, they really like small diameter stems, things that are 3 inches or less. Those are the things that they most readily seek in any time of year. And interestingly, they often soak branches in water for a few days before they eat them, and that's to leach out the tannins that are present in some of those woody plants. And the beavers have the bacteria in their intestines, which help them digest the cellulose in all these woody products. And beavers typically feed within 100 yards of the edge of a pond, and one beaver can eat up to 200 aspens per year. Incredible. Beavers do have predators: wolves, coyotes, bears, lynx, and of course humans. Hunting and deforestation led to disappearance of beavers in New Hampshire and other places in the past. And beavers are actually easily caught when they're on land, so they're much safer in water. And even when they gnaw off a branch, they'll often drag it into the water to eat it rather than eating it on land. River otters will sometimes break into the den and kill the kits, and mink may also attack the young kits. And in winter, when the water is frozen, predators can walk right up to the lodge. But you have to be a pretty big predator, like a grizzly bear, in order to get into that lodge. And in the fall, when the beavers are carrying woody materials through their canals, predators like wolves may attack them while they're swimming in the canals. Beaver dams are obviously the most obvious sign of beaver activity. Why do they build dams? Well, they need to create a pond that's deep enough for their lodges, which provide food, shelter, warmth, reproduction, and protection from predators. And the greater water surface and depth make it easier for them to drag food and branches and other construction materials. The deep water prevents the underwater entrance from freezing over. And more vegetation around the pond serves as food sources. And as before, we mentioned that they store and cache their food in the underwater area near the entrance to the lodge. There are very few predators that can enter the lodge. Beaver dams are constructed of branches, rocks, leaves, and other debris, and they're filled with mud from the bottom of the stream. They're amazingly leak proof, and the beavers are quick to repair their leaks. If they hear running water, they look for a leak and plug it. And the dams are usually 4 to 7 feet across, but they can be a lot larger. One near our northern Ontario cabin is almost 100 feet across. And in fact, the longest beaver dam is almost 3,000 feet. That's in northern Alberta, Canada. That's more than twice as long as the Hoover Dam. And you can actually see it on satellite pictures. Beavers often add to their dams as the water level rises, and smaller dams are sometimes constructed to relieve pressure on the main dam. And beavers can put up a 25-foot dam in a matter of hours. But here's the most important fact: beavers almost never make just one dam. They usually create a whole system of tiered dams, and they integrate that the dams into a system of canals, and it's a very complex engineering feat. As I mentioned, the dams are constructed of leaves, rocks, branches, and other debris, and then they fill it with mud from the bottom of the stream. They're very leak-proof and incredibly strong. And there you see a beaver dam up close. That's a pretty impressive one. And beavers can carry some huge branches back to the dams and lodges. So here you see a beaver with this really long branch in his mouth. And they choose and maintain their dam sites very carefully. First of all, they have to hear running water. And then they search through heavily wooded areas for a medium sized stream that's neither too deep nor too steep. And then the beavers create a bank along the stream's edge, and they spike sticks into the mud bed. They anchor everything with heavy rocks, and the beaver pond allows them to move faster. Again, they can swim much faster than they can walk. And the depth of the pond allows them to build their lodges. They really need at least 2 to 3 feet deep water in order to make sure that their entrance to the lodge is underwater. And if they hear running water, they look for a leak and plug it up. Somebody once did an experiment. They played the sound of running water to the beavers, and the beavers immediately ran to retrieve some sticks. The beavers repair those leaks almost as soon as they hear running water. And they start by bridging sticks across the top of the lake, and then they fill the area below with mud, leaves, etc. And the running water also pushes sediment forward, which helps plug the leak. Okay, commercial will be over in a minute. Okay, so here's a beaver going to fix this leak in this dam. So he's starting out up at the top, putting some sticks, what we call the bridging at the top, bridging sticks. Going back, retrieve some more sticks. Here he comes back. Once again, you can see everything's up at the top of the dam. You'll fill in the bottom a little bit later. Swimming underwater, going to get a stick. Coming back now with the kind of a bigger stick that it still has some leaves on it. Pretty incredible. Uh, Again, these dams are incredibly strong. Here's a game cam picture of deer running right across our beaver dam that's just off the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. We have lots of beaver dams here. There are at least 3 beaver dams in our wetland. One is the main one just off the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. That's this one here. You can see a second one upstream when you're sitting on the bench at the Yellow Trail. And there's a third one on Bog Brook. There are probably some other ones under construction. And actually, some of our colleagues who have kayaked all the way from McDaniels Marsh along Bog Brook have seen at least 12 beaver dams. So there, as we mentioned before, beavers seldom build just one dam. Usually there's a whole system of dams. This is showing the one, if you were sitting on the bench at the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest and looking upstream, you can see this other dam out here. So beavers usually choose the narrowest part of the stream to build their dams, and their ability to identify and patch holes is more than instinctual. It implies the ability to reason. Their system of canals, similarly, is very well planned. And when digging connection canals, they always choose the shortest distance between 2 water bodies. We'll talk about the canals in just a minute. And though they can down a small tree in minutes, when they cut larger trees, they'll use the wind to their advantage by chewing at the base just enough to let the breeze of the wind actually knock it over. They do much of their work at nighttime. That's primarily to avoid predators. And beavers begin building directly inversely to the volume flow rates of a stream. And experimental work suggests that the cues to build dams are not just in response to an audio signal, It seems that the flow rate is important. And there's something important about a flow rate of about 250 meters per second that seems to trigger their activity in choosing a site for a dam. And interestingly, that's the same flow rate at which log jams occur. Okay, so something very interesting about that rate. And they integrate these canals into a system of dams, and this whole complex is a major engineering feat. And beavers, again, as we mentioned, seldom make just one dam. Usually they have a system of tiered dams. And they'll start low at a convenient spot, and then they build other dams further upstream. And sometimes small dams that are not very functional are built by the juvenile beavers. The beaver lodge is mainly the primary reason that they build a dam. The lodges are either built in the open water or against the bank of a stream. So we talk about open water lodges and bank lodges. These are dome-shaped structures that are built with sticks and muds. They have an entrance, actually multiple entrances underwater, and the living quarters are above the water level. This is showing a diagram of a typical beaver lodge. And here you can see it's dome shaped. It has several tiers. Okay. Underwater here at the base, you have two entrances, okay, or exits, as it were. They tend to cache sticks down here at the bottom, and those sticks are what they eat on during the winter. Here you see a more adult beaver that's bringing some sticks over to leave here. This is probably a younger beaver. This first level of lodge is kind of used to dry off, okay, and maybe to eat. And then the upper level of the lodge is the sleeping area and the mating area. So that's where the beavers will tend to huddle together in the winter to keep warm. We mentioned there's at least two entrances below the water surface, and there are two tiers above the water level. Again, the lower tier is a shelf that's used for basically drying off and for feeding, and that upper tier is used for sleeping and nesting, and it's often lined with a lot of wood chips. And as I mentioned, there's a cache of sticks that's kept below the water line, and that's their food source for the winter. So the water in the pond needs to be at least 2 to 3 feet deep to prevent ice from blocking those underwater entrances. And as many as 8 beavers in a family can occupy the lodge. Usually two parents, 2 to 3 1-year-olds, and 2 to 3 2-year-olds. The beaver lodge, again, this is from over at the Sawyer Brook headwaters. This is a dried out beaver pond, and you can see what used to be underwater. This is one of the entrances to that lodge. And then there's a second one over on the other side. So the beavers, again, have two entrances to that underwater lodge, and that protects them from most predators. And the video here is going to show a beaver entering one of these entrances. That's obviously not a beaver. But this, well, another commercial. We have to put up with these. And here's the lodge. And we're going to go underneath here in a minute. That's showing a beaver going into one of those entrances. He's going to pop out, probably take something up there. Again, they cache sticks and branches underwater near that entrance to the lodge. That's their food source for the winter. And this video shows the beaver retrieving a branch and bringing it into the lodge for the young to eat. Once again, commercials. And there, the beaver's bringing it up. There's a kit inside, and he's bringing those in for the kits to be able to eat. The beaver lodge is nearly impervious. Again, it's built with sticks, stone, and mud, and the sticks are interwoven in a very strong fashion. And the mud gets cemented together, and the inner layers actually become almost as hard as concrete. And about the only thing that can break into that lodge would be a big grizzly bear. These black bear cubs can only play on the lodge. They have no chance of breaking into the lodge. The temperature inside a beaver lodge is maintained at about 32 degrees in winter, and it's very well insulated by the mud and any snow that's on the top. And the beaver's bodies radiate heat, and they huddle together to conserve heat when they're in the lodge in winter. And bank dens tend to be a little cooler than the open water lodges. And note the mist that's rising from the top of this lodge. That's as the beavers are breathing inside that lodge. Beaver lodges are important to the ecology even after the beavers have abandoned them. And that's because some other semi aquatic animals can use those abandoned lodges. So it might be muskrats, otters, mink, or water voles. And the muskrats also build lodges that superficially resemble beaver lodges, but they usually don't have the large sticks that you'll see on the beaver lodges. And there are even instances where a pack of wolves took over an abandoned beaver lodge. So, how do beavers survive the winter? Again, the lodge temperature stays at about 32 degrees because it's so well insulated and because the beavers are huddling together to conserve heat. And again, beavers also store fat in their tail. We mentioned that before. And they utilize that fat as an energy source over the winter. And the adult beavers can reduce their metabolic rate. The younger beavers usually don't. And the pile of sticks underwater at the base of the lodge is the primary food source for them in the winter. The adults will go and retrieve some sticks for the young to feed on. And again, the beavers are sleeping together in the upper level of the lodge for warmth. And interestingly, sometimes they'll even let a muskrat into the lodge to huddle together with them. Uh, because they can't, because they don't have anybody to huddle with, single beavers tend to do less well than those beavers that are still with their families. Also, the beaver fur is thicker in winter, and as we mentioned before, they spread that oil from their anal glands on their fur, and that makes it waterproof. And sometimes, if there's open water, they may venture out to eat some trees in winter. Uh, 2 winters ago, we actually, it was last winter, we saw this beaver lodge that appeared in Johns Glen on one of the polishing ponds. It was a little bit unusual that it appeared. It was out on one of the islands that's in the middle polishing pond. The other thing, even though we focus mostly on the dams and the lodges, one of the important part of the beaver habitat is a system of canals. And the canals allow them to swim right up to the forest, cut down a tree, and drag it back out to the dam or the lodge without getting eaten by a predator. The canals also allow them to float some timber to the lodge or the dam rather than having to drag it across the land. And the canals also provide a lot of microhabitats for a variety of species. This is showing the canal system from an aerial view. And if you look, it's just incredible. Look at all these little canals that are jutting off aside. Uh, Basically, the three types of canals that they have: extension canals, connector canals, and benthic canals. Extension canals are the canals that allow them to swim to the woodland, grab some trees and other woody products, and then come back and swim back to the dam or the lodge. The connector canals, on the other hand, connect two bodies of water, like the wetland to another wetland, or a wetland to a pond or to the river. And then the benthic canals are ones we can't see. These are actually underwater, and they've excavated these routes at the bottom. I'll show you that in a minute. Uh, in her book Beaverland, Lila Phillip describes walking through a beaver pond with a guide, and the bottom of the pond is muddy. But then all of a sudden, her boot drops down to a lower gravel surface. Well, she's actually found a benthic canal. Benthic means related to the bottom of the body of water. And because beavers don't have great eyesight, they dig these canals at the bottom of the pond so that they can travel along by feel to their desired destination. whether it's between the lodge and the dam or up to the bank of the river or stream that they're in. And this is showing basically a drained beaver pond, and you actually see two benthic canals here. See this one along the bottom. The dam probably was up here, so this is probably headed back toward an open water lodge. Here's one that's probably headed over to a wooded area. That's what a benthic canal looks like. And the beavers follow these underwater routes. So let's watch this in a video. Once again, I apologize for all these commercials. They get embedded into the PowerPoints. So here the beaver is down in a benthic canal at the bottom of the water. It's almost like a secret passage. Extension canals are what allow them to go to the wooded areas. So these would go from typically from their lodge or from the beaver dam out to the wooded area. And it provides a safe water route so they don't have to climb over land where they would be more vulnerable. And then the connector canals connect two aquatic environments. Again, might be two wetlands together, or the wetland being connected to the pond or to the river or stream. And once again, these produce some level of protection from predators. Uh, Once again, both the connector canal and the extension canals allow them to relatively safely go between these areas. And it also helps them maintain a desired water level between the ponds and the wetland. So let's look at this one. Oh boy. Now here's the beaver going into one of these canals. And he's swimming along. Pretty long canal. You can see he's relatively well protected. And this is kind of putting it all together. This diagram nicely shows the relationship of the canals, the dam, the lodge, and so on. So again, here is the beaver pond. Here's a wetland. The connection between the beaver pond and the wetland, that would be what we call a connector canal. An extension canal would be one that goes over to the wooded area. So number 5 here is the extension canal. Here's the beaver dam. Here's the beaver lodge. Here's the second beaver lodge. This would be a bank lodge, whereas this is an open water lodge. And this little thing is a beaver slide, where they basically, some of the trees they cut down, they would slide them, the big branches down into the water and come back. So again, really incredible, complex habitat that they've developed here. So again, the other thing, remember I mentioned that the beavers had built a lodge over in Johns Glen in one of the polishing ponds. Well, in the adjacent polishing pond, we saw this interesting long line in the ice. And we speculated that the beavers were actually going over to the wooded area, swimming back with sticks underwater so that they could build this pond. And in fact, in the spring, we found evidence that that was the case. This was an entrance. Out here is the polishing pond. So there was a place that the beavers would come up and down through here. And then on the other side of this path, leading down to Bog Brook, was this path. So in fact, this was where the beavers were actually going. They were going from the wooded area that was near Bog Brook back up into the polishing pond. Interesting, beavers actually will sometimes break through the ice with their head in order to breathe. So particularly if the ice is thin, they like to pop up and have access holes that they can go in. And they often will see pockets of air trapped underneath the ice. And when they breathe under the ice, they often leave bubbles. And interestingly, trappers who are hunting beavers will actually use those bubbles to identify where the beavers are likely living. So again, beavers are the architects of the wetlands, ultimately much of the landscape in North America. They're also engineers and construction crews for building the wetlands. They're keepers of the wetlands ecology. But unfortunately, historically, they weren't fully appreciated until they were gone. Kind of reminds us baby boomers of the old Joni Mitchell song. That you don't know what you've got till it's gone. It leaves paradise, put up a parking lot. Sorry for you people who are not baby boomers, probably never heard that song. uh, so again, once again, are you confused? Was that an otter that you saw, or a beaver, or a muskrat, or a mink? Uh, we mentioned the things that we look for. And I'm not going to repeat this. We saw these slides before. Uh, I don't know how we got duplicates in here. Okay, beavers are what's known as a keystone species. Uh, Again, they're two interrelated concepts, keystones and trophic cascades, and both illustrate that removal of one element can disrupt the entire ecology. A keystone is a wedge-shaped rock that holds up an arch. And if you remove that keystone, the entire structure crumbles. So beavers are a keystone to the wetland ecology and to the broader ecology. And if you remove them, the whole ecology suffers. And there are other biological keystones like the salmon in Alaska, elephants in the savanna, the wolves in Yellowstone, and the mighty oak tree. The trophic cascade was described by Aldo Leopold, the famous naturalist, ecologist, and conservationist. And he recognized early in the 20th century that if you remove the alpha predators, you have deleterious effects on the ecology. So if you haven't already done this, go to this website. It's How Wolves Change Rivers. And it's a story about Yellowstone. When the wolves were removed from Yellowstone, there were widespread long-term implications. The wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 1995, and the wolves began to cull the deer and elk populations that had been eating all the foliage. They would eat mainly young willow, aspen, and cottonwood plants that the beavers needed. And the deer and elk then started to avoid going into the valleys, so the foliage starts to regenerate, the forests and the willows reappear. Now some songbirds appear, and beavers reappear, and the beavers build dams and create ponds that benefit all sorts of species. And the wolves also killed coyotes, which used to feed on small mammals. So the small mammals now flourished. And bears and eagles would eat the carrion left by the wolves and eat some of the berries on the trees. And the river changed. There was now less erosion of the river banks. The banks were now more stable. So it's an incredible story, and I recommend you go to that website. Well, fur trappers in the 19th century largely wiped out the beaver population, particularly in the Northwest. Ben Goldfarb, in his book Eager, writes that the disappearance of beavers dried up the wetlands and meadows, hastened erosion, altered the course of countless streams, and imperiled water-loving fish, fowl, and amphibians, basically creating an aquatic dust bowl. Logging also reduced the beaver food sources, and beautiful and ecologically wonderful wetlands suddenly were replaced by arroyos and wadis, which are basically dry stream beds. And again, trapping and deforestation nearly eliminated the beaver here in New Hampshire in the late 1800s. Actually, 6 beavers were released here in New Hampshire between 1926 and 1930. It was part of a restocking program. There were 48 more that were added in 1940. And by 1955, the entire state of New Hampshire was repopulated with beavers. Beaver trapping turned this into this. So again, incredible loss of the beaver changed the ecology. So again, Ben Goldfarb in his book Eager calls them basically ecological and hydrological Swiss Army knives. I like that. The wetland at Eastman is really a jewel of biodiversity. It sits between Johns Glen and Heath Forest. It's best viewed from the Yellow Trail at Heath Forest, and it's formed near the confluence of Bog Brook and Eastman Brook. It's part of the McDaniels Marsh watershed, which is the main aquifer sits underneath it, and it's key to water quality for Grantham. And prior Eastman consultants raved about the value of Eastman's wetlands. And the beaver is the keystone to that wetland. The entire wetland ecology really dependent upon the beaver dam. So beaver dams play a vital role in maintaining and diversifying the stream and the riparian habitat. And by constructing dams that impound water and retain sediment, they really alter the physical, the chemical, and the biological characteristics of that entire river ecosystem. There are benefits to plants, fish, and wildlife. And beaver dam wetlands produce a habitat that has vegetation. It's good for aquatic invertebrates, for fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Among the benefits of the beaver pond, minks, muskrats, and bats forage in and around the beaver ponds. Moose will be seen eating wetland plants at the edges. Young salmon and trout need slow-moving water in order to develop. And salamanders, frogs, turtles, a bunch of birds, and other creatures live along these beaver-created habitats. And they provide an important habitat for great blue herons, osprey, kingfishers, and other birds. And flooded trees turn into snags, which in turn are an ideal habitat for many insects, birds, and mammalian species. And the wetlands are incredible carbon sinks. Hopefully, they help slow the climate change. They represent only 6 to 9% of Earth's surface, but they contain about 35% of global terrestrial carbon. Incredible. So they store 3 to 5 times more carbon per acre than tropical forests. That's an incredible statistic. So it's not just fishermen and wildlife that benefit. Importantly, the weight of the beaver pond presses water deep into the ground, and that helps recharge the aquifers that are then used downstream for farms and properties. And the sediment and pollutants get filtered out in the slack waters, so it really cleanses the flow of the water in the streams. And beaver ponds combat both floods and drought. They actually act like giant sponges. Floods dissipate in the ponds, and then the wetlands capture and store both spring rain and flood water and snow melt, and they release the water in delayed pulses that can help sustain crops when you have a dry summer season. And wildfires tend to hiss out in the wet meadows. And beaver dams, again, slow the fast moving water, so it reduces erosion on the banks. This is all from Ben Goldfarb's book, Eager. So once again, lots of benefits directly to humans and lots of other benefits. You can read through that slide in the corresponding PowerPoint presentation, which will be on the Eastman web portal. Beaver ponds do store flood water. The Milwaukee River shed was estimated to support almost 5,000 beavers. So they did a study that showed that beavers can complete floodwater storage 100 times more efficiently than an engineering department can. And water storage developed by beaver ponds in this rivershed estimated 1.7 billion gallons of water annually. And the stormwater storage was valued at 3.3 billion by the Milwaukee Sewage Department. So an incredible work that the beavers did that could not be replicated by human construction crews. So the beavers dam a stream and it creates a beaver pond. Then they create one or more lodges. Pretty simple, right? Hardly. The beavers almost never make just one big dam. They usually create a system of dams and they integrate into that system multiple canals. And Eastman is no different. As I mentioned before, our kayakers have found at least 12 beaver dams in and around Eastman. And when water is running, oxygen enters it. And under a beaver meadow, there are places where still water creates anaerobic conditions, and anaerobic microbes live there. And once nitrogen enters, these anaerobic microbes actually cleanse the water of the nitrates. So the anaerobic microbes that live in beaver ponds and beaver meadows can actually remove 80% of the nitrogen that enters them. And the dissolved carbon and nitrogen then continues to run downstream. And this one we're going to just go through quickly, but it's just showing some of the benefits that the beaver pond can fight both floods, drought, and fires. This is showing an area from Idaho that experienced a wildfire. And you can see that the entire forest is wiped out by this wildfire. But what's left is this narrow area in the middle that basically was created by the beaver pond down here. In Maggie Creek in Nevada, beavers were able to turn this dry, springtime only stream into this. So here they created a dam. It created a beaver pond. And look at all the foliage that developed around here. Cattle had grazed away most of the vegetation in that area. And then they did this project where they put up some fences and did a little bit of planting, but the beavers took over and did the rest. And it turned now there's more than 20 acres of open water and 3 miles of wetland along the stream. And they converted basically what used to be just a seasonal stream into a perennial one. And there was a 2 foot increase in the water table. That's an incredible amount of water underground that previously was not there. And now there was more than 100 acres of riparian vegetation. And it resulted in production of 1,000 pounds of grass per acre. So from a rancher's perspective, the beavers increased production tenfold. So they loved it. Historically, again, the beavers had become nearly extinct, particularly in the Northwest. There were a few that existed in Idaho, but they were considered to be nuisances. So in 1948, Idaho Fish and Game found 76 beavers and they relocated them to remote areas. They had wooden boxes and by parachute sent them into the Chamberlain Basin. Nobody really knew what was going to happen when they did this. All but one of those 76 beavers landed successfully. The boxes broke open. The beavers came out of the boxes. And nobody really knew how huge that impact was going to be. But years later, there was an incredible transformation. And this is showing a map from the air that basically shows the areas where the beavers were relocated now are incredibly green compared to an area over here where the beavers were not relocated. So again, the diversity of plants increased by a third as well. So just like our forests, which have a succession, beaver ponds also have a succession. They're dynamic areas that produce a series of habitat types as they age. And when the beavers have exhausted all their food sources around the beaver pond, they'll abandon the pond and the dam will eventually break down gradually over time. And once they're abandoned, the beaver ponds drain and turn into what we call beaver meadows. And you can see a beaver meadow here at Eastman. It's off the wetland spur off Springbrook Trail. And it's a beautiful view. And the beaver meadows are ideal areas for grouse to rear their broods. Deer and other animals will use these areas in the summer because of the edge that's created between the woods and the meadow. And this is showing that beaver meadow here. Again, as the water drains, much of the sediment is left. So there's a lot of sedge and grasses covering the bottom. That's why it's called the beaver meadow. Wildflowers will pop up. Here you see lots of wildflowers. And you see some snags out here. Basically, again, snags are dead trees that are still standing, and they become great habitat for insects, many birds, and a few animal species. So again, all these changes lead to a habitat that's very desirable for a wildlife species. And once again, Lila Phillip, in her book Beaverland, says beaver meadows, when you first look at them, appear to be dry, but they actually work like wetlands. They really act like huge underground sponges that are able to soak up and hold large stores of water. So when flooding occurs, the beaver meadows will absorb the flood water. And during periods of severe drought, the beaver meadows serve as caches of water that can keep rivers and streams from totally drying up. Um, so once again, groundwater is probably just as important as surface water. And water that lies beneath the surface is very important. And when beaver dams change the course of rivers, they actually spread the water out over a much wider area, like it's a slow moving sheet of water. Um, so we talked about all the benefits of beavers. Well, beavers can also be nuisances. They can fell valuable trees. They can eat ornamental shrubbery that's planted near their beaver ponds, and their dams can produce unwanted flooding. At Eastman, a beaver pond flooded the popular ski trail. We'll talk about Andy's Alley in a minute. It also produced some flooding that could damage properties of some of the residents. And dams that are located near culverts can lead to flooding of roadways. And rarely beavers can carry diseases like rabies, giardiasis, or tularemia. And very rarely they might attack humans and pets. This is showing Andy's Alley. Andy's Alley is over between John's Glen and the bridge, so-called bridge to nowhere that comes from the Brook Trail. People used to be able to use this trail to avoid skiing or walking on the road. And we used to enjoy taking this trail, but now it's flooded. So it's really impassable. It's really been impassable since December of 2020. Culverts are often called the Achilles heel of American infrastructure, and they're areas where flooding occurs that leads to collapse of the overlying roads. And Ben Goldfarb, in his book, wrote this anecdote. He says typically the young beaver will age out of the family. Remember, they get aged out at about 2 years old. So they get pushed out of the beaver pond. They have to go seek their own new territory. They're out looking for a new territory. The beaver spots a roadway with a culvert and says, "Hey, it kind of looks like a dam, just needs some repair." So that teenage beaver builds his own dam and creates his own beaver pond, and that leads to flooding of the overlying road. So beavers can be nuisances. So how do we deal with beavers when they're nuisances? Do we kill them? Do we trap and relocate them? Actually, neither of those strategies makes much sense. Because either they or other beavers are very likely to return to the wetland that they from which they were removed. In fact, they will return. And there are much more humane ways to deal with the problem. We need to think about prevention first, and then we need to think about flow devices, alternately called pond levelers, beaver pipes, or beaver deceivers. So you could trap and relocate a whole family. Again, you can't just relocate one beaver. You have to actually make sure you got the whole family or the whole colony. And it might not be legal in your state. And it might just create the same problem wherever you relocate them to. But the big reason not to trap and relocate is the beavers are going to come back. Either those beavers or another set of beavers will return to the wetland that you remove them from. So this solution is only a temporary one, never a permanent one. You need to think about prevention. There are certain things you can do to avoid beaver-related issues. Trees could be protected by wrapping them with a hardware cloth. I'll show you a picture of those in a minute. And ornamental plots, culverts, and small ponds could be fenced in with small mesh woven wire fences. You can clear trees and shrubs that are near the ponds and make sure you don't plant crops or potential food sources within 100 yards of the streams. If you remember, the beavers typically only utilize the woody products within about 100 yards of a pond or a stream. This is showing a wire woven fence that's around a tree that can help keep the beavers away from them. Control of beaver populations in New Hampshire. There is an annual trapping season, and it's geared to harvest surplus beaver. Uh, Beaver are also taken out of season by licensed trouble trappers, so they have to have a license. And in the past, New Hampshire used to have conservation officers that went out and trapped nuisance beavers, but they stopped doing it. It was labor intensive, it was costly, it required permits and damage liability. There weren't any good relocation sites to put them. But most of all, it was not sound biological management. And that's because when you trap and relocate them, other beavers or the same beavers will always return. So beavers are protected in New Hampshire by statute. So then we get into pond levelers or what we call beaver deceivers. Beaver deceivers are actually a humane way of dealing with potential flooding that's caused by the beaver dams. And actually, the terms apply to a whole group of hardware devices that divert water flow and reduce flooding risk while preserving the beaver dams and lodges and actually sparing the beavers. They're typically cost effective when you compare them to the cost of repeated beaver trapping or the cost of repairing damage to property or roads. So why are they called beaver deceivers? Well, ordinarily the beavers rapidly plug up any leaks in their dams. But what they don't realize with the beaver deceiver is that water is flowing through a pipe, so they're actually deceived. And you can lower the water level of a pond by about a foot before the beavers will catch on and build another dam. This is just showing what a beaver deceiver or flow device looks like. Basically, it consists of a long pipe that goes through basically through the beaver dam. There's an intake on the beaver pond side, and then on the exit side, again, you typically will put a cage of some sort. There's usually a cage up here as well, and that's to prevent the beavers from coming in there. This is actually showing one that's out there. I can't remember if this one is from the Sawyer Brook headwaters or not. But again, here you see this long pipe, and here it's exiting. It's going right through the dam. So again, this is showing a beaver deceiver. There's a culvert over here on the right. There happens to be kind of a roadway or path back here. There's a submerged pipe that comes down here, and then there's a filter that's out here. This is Skip Lyle, who basically is the creator and New England expert on beaver deceivers. Here he's installing a beaver deceiver at Elbow Pond. Another picture of the beaver deceiver. So again, pond levelers, including the beaver deceiver, basically consist of this long pipe conduit that goes through the beaver dam and has an enclosed wire cage at both ends of the pipe. And researchers have found that if the water intake to the pipe was about 40 feet away from the dam, the beavers will tend to ignore it. And they also found that a 5-foot wide wire cage typically discourages the beavers from blocking it. So the wire cage also prevents the beavers and other animals from crawling into that pipe. And some installers will poke small holes into the dam as kind of a diversionary maneuver. So the beavers think the falling water level is due to those holes, and they'll fix those holes, but they ignore the actual leak which is going through the pipe. And if you lower a pond too much, the beavers are going to abandon that pond. Remember, they need probably 2 to 3 feet of water so that the entrances to their beaver lodges are preserved. And typically, when you put in a beaver deceiver, the wire cages need to be replaced about every 5 years, but the plastic piping usually lasts for decades. So the benefits of beaver deceivers are that the water flow is restored, flooding is prevented, costly unclogging of culverts is avoided, You avoid costly repairs to the roadways above the culverts, and the beavers get to stay. So they're really, this is kind of a win-win for everybody. Uh, Eastman's underutilized jewels, our wetlands are really ecological wonders and amazing wildlife habitats. And again, our most well-known wetland lies between Johns Glen and Heath Forest, and it's fed by Bog Brook and Eastman Brook, and it's molded by the beaver dams that are out there. The less well-known wetland lies off the wetland spur off Springbrook Trail to the north, and that now really is a beaver meadow rather than a beaver pond. And both are vastly underutilized. Each really could benefit from having some sort of elevated platform or walkway so that we could use these areas for viewing birds and wildlife. The southern wetland could also benefit from having some sort of kayak access. So why aren't we using them? This would be a typical viewing platform. Some of these are down south. So where do we go now? We have to balance our dedication to wildlife and ecology with our commitment to provide recreational activities and to protect property. So could we relocate that ski trail that used to be Andy's Alley? Is there a threat to property and roadways? And if so, are there ways to mitigate it without removing the beavers? Well, we need to think about potential solutions that don't involve killing the beavers or relocating them. And could we utilize that water from expanding Beaver Pond? And can we take better advantage of our wetland jewels? So again, how can we monitor the beaver activity that's ongoing? Do we use drones? Do we use game cams? Do we use what's known as a Motus tower? And where will the next beaver dam appear? Can we predict this and its implications? Well, why aren't we using that water? In 2020, we had the worst drought that we've seen in years. The water surface levels were low, the water tables were low. Eastman was on water use restrictions. And experts are actually predicting that we're in for extended summer droughts for many years to come, punctuated by periods of heavy precipitation. And the beavers create a potential source of water for Eastman. So why aren't we using it? Again, there is a pumping station at the polishing ponds that sits only about 50 to 100 yards away from the beaver pond. Right now, it pumps water up to the golf course that's used for irrigation on the golf course. So why can't we pump water up from the beaver pond to do the same thing? Interesting concept. That would be a win-win-win for Eastman, the ecology, and the beaver. When you lose beavers, things happen. Interesting thing happened this past year. This is the reason we're redoing the presentation on beavers. In June of 2024, there was a cascade of events that led to both some good and bad outcomes. There were heavy rains that created a new channel around the beaver dam that was up at Grass Pond. Grass Pond sits near the exit of near exit 14 off US Highway 89. You can see it usually when you're coming down from the north. If you look off to the right, just past exit 14, you'll see Grass Pond. And when this new channel occurred around the beaver dam, it led to almost total drainage of Grass Pond, and there were no beavers to repair it. So a non-Eastman landowner around the same time removed two beaver dams and the beavers from Stony Brook, just north of Mill Pond. And what happened was that the sediment and phosphates then poured into Mill Pond and over the dam on Stony Brook into Eastman Lake. The good thing was that there was relief of flooding from some Eastman properties that were located just north of Mill Pond. And the other good thing was that the Department of Transportation had planned to put in a beaver deceiver up at Grass Pond once the water level was lower. So now they might be able to do it. But quite frankly, I'm not sure that the beavers are ever going to rebuild that dam there. So I'm not sure if a beaver deceiver up there is going to do very much. So this is just showing, again, up here is where Grass Pond is. Here's Route 89 here. And here you see Stony Creek coming down here. Mill Pond is right about here, and this would be the west end of Eastman Lake. And again, the beaver dam broke down here, so water's flowing down here. The Eastman or the non-Eastman landowner removed these two beaver dams that were located here. So again, you had flow that came straight down into Mill Pond. And fortunately, many of the phosphates appear to have been absorbed into Mill Pond, but a lot of silt continued down into Eastman Lake. So here are the issues. The beavers that abandoned Grass Pond, the beavers had already abandoned Grass Pond, and I doubt that they're going to come back there. So we can't rely on them to close that channel. And the beavers, either old ones or new ones, are almost certainly likely to come back and build more dams on Stony Creek just north of Mill Pond. And if they do so, we need to give consideration to putting the beaver deceiver there. And it gets a little complicated because the original dams were not on Eastman property. Well, it didn't take long. They're already back. It was June when the beaver dams and the beavers were removed from those two dams on Stony Brook. By October, there was plenty evidence of beaver activity in and around Eastman. And there were lots of signs of beaver activity both on Eastman Lake, Bog Brook, the Eastman wetland, and Stony Brook. And a new beaver dam, in fact, has already appeared on Stony Brook, just south of where the old dams were. This time, though, it's on Eastman property, which is a good thing. So Eastman has engaged the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection, Wildlife Services to install a pond leveling device at that new dam. So hopefully they're going to do that in the spring once water is flowing again. And our maintenance people actually did a drone fly over the area, and it didn't yet show any other dams on Stony Brook. But it's very likely the beavers, again, as we mentioned before, are going to build more dams there. So here's a few historical tidbits to close out this session. There's a history of the beaver supermoon, the beaver tail, the castoreum. So in terms of the history, long ago, there were huge beavers. They were as big as bears. And at one time, it's estimated there were 100 to 400 million beavers in North America. The fur trade, lumber harvesting, and clearing of land for farming led to near extinction of the beavers in the 19th century. Now there are about 10 to 15 million beavers, and the beavers have played a huge role in changing the course of rivers and influencing the geology and ecology. The beaver moon, which we actually just experienced a couple months ago, the November supermoon is known as the beaver moon. And the almanac references monthly full moons with names that are tied to early Native American or colonial or European folklore. And November was the time of year when the beavers used to begin to take shelter in their lodges. So that's why it was called the beaver moon. The beaver tail once was considered as valuable as beaver fur. In fact, probably more valuable. The beaver tail was treated as a delicacy because of its high fat content. And in medieval Europe, the beaver tail was referred to as forest cod because it was often served on bank tables in place of fish. The Catholic Church even allowed the beaver tail to be eaten on days when Catholics were supposed to be forbidden to eat meat. The beaver tail was also touted as an aphrodisiac and referred to as the Viagra of medieval Europe. And coyote, mink, and fishers love to eat rotting beaver tail, so it's often been used as bait by trappers. I mentioned castoreum before. Remember, the beaver's name is Castor canadensis. Castoreum is contained in two castor sacs. They're located between a beaver's pelvis and tail, and it's separate from their testicles and separate from their internal organs. And each can be almost the size of a small clenched fist. Castoreum is a yellow granular substance that has a very musky smell. and it's been used in the past for medicinal purposes. It's named after Castor, of Castor and Pollux of Greek mythology, known as a healer and preserver of disease. And the Roman author and naturalist Pliny claimed that it was a cure for headaches, constipation, and epilepsy. It's also been touted for a whole other host of medical conditions. And the term castration actually derives from the myth that beavers used to escape hunters by cleverly removing their testicles and throwing them at pursuers. Castoreum, again, was once valued almost as much as the fur of the beaver. It's no longer used for medicinal purposes, and actually, any medicinal value that it had likely derived from the salicylic acid in the beaver's diet of willow bark. Remember, salicylic acid is the active component of aspirin. But today, castoreum is still used in raspberry, strawberry, or vanilla pudding, raspberry soda or jello, and my favorite, raspberry Twizzlers. It's also used in some alcoholic beverages, in some cosmetics and perfumes and colognes. The beavers do have a use for the castoreum. They mix it with urine excreted into mounds for scent. And the castor mounds are used in attracting a mate or telling other beavers that this is their territory. And sometimes you'll actually see a deposit of castoreum in the snow. Might be outside a lodge. This is showing here's a beaver pond, here's the snow, and here's this yellow substance. Here's the close-up view of that. And that's castoreum. There are a couple outstanding references if you want to learn more about beavers. One is Ben Goldfarb's book, Eager, which is a classic. The second one is a little newer one called Beaverland by Lila Phillip. And there are several other suggested readings. They're listed here, and these will be in the corresponding PowerPoint that will be on the Eastman web portal. But there are a couple other beaver resources I want you to be particularly aware of. This one, New England Forest does a 5-part series on YouTube on beaver pond wildlife. And this is an incredible series. And even though the beavers are central to the series, it really demonstrates the impact of the beaver pond on so many different species. I highly recommend that you look at all 5 parts of that series. And then there's a second YouTube presentation called The Secret World of the North American Beaver. And it's from Our World, and it's narrated by Henry Fonda. And it's an incredible video about the life of a beaver all the way from his birth through having a family of his own. And much of the footage that some of those clips that we included in today's presentation come from that video. And Ben Goldfarb also does some YouTube presentations on the secret lives of beavers. So those are some great things. If you have some time on your hand, you may want to look at those. So that's all about beavers. This is the January 2025 update. Beavers are an incredible species, and we hope that you'll want to learn some more about them.